Good morning and welcome to another edition of The Interview. I'm Hiten Samtani with The Real Deal, and today I have with me co-chairman and CEO of Rudin Management, Bill Rudin. Bill is also the chairman of REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York. So he is someone who's seen the office market as an operator, as a New Yorker, as an administrator, and as a longtime champion of New York City. Bill, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're chatting at a time in the New York City market that a lot of people have predicted is going to fundamentally change the value proposition of the New York City office market. So Facebook recently, which has 1 million square feet in New York and 1.5 million square feet in the pipeline, has made an announcement that they're going to transition quite substantially to remote work. Right. And there's other companies, other big tech companies that have made similar announcements. Twitter said it's going to be fully remote, and there's other big companies that are doing this. So I wanted to get your take on what that means for the New York City office market.
I think we have to put everything in perspective. If you watched Mark Zuckerberg's interview the other day on CNBC and you get past the headline, he makes it very clear that this is part of a larger strategy. We live in a real world, right? Where human interaction is critical. And if you followed his interview, he even talks about that senior management people like himself are going to continue to work from their office. Only the people who are seasoned and experienced are going to have the opportunity to
I think that's what he said initially. He said initially when we hire new people, if they're senior and they're engineers and they can work remotely in a manner that's efficient, we'll let them do that. But eventually there will be, and yes, you're right, Mark is not planning to stay at home and dial in for Zooms every day. Mark is probably going to be in the headquarters or in New York or wherever it would be.
But I think he talked about eventually over the next 10 years, half of the company. But they're 45,000 people now. So you assume 10% growth, 5% growth. So it's a few thousand people a year. Mark in the interview made it very clear that there are challenges related to working from home. That the team building, the feeling of being part of the social bond that all companies need to create within their organization is going to be something they're going to have to figure out. And I think what we're going through right now with COVID-19 is, there are fundamental shifts in the way people are thinking. But as we get back to normal, I think people will find that having that office environment is critical.
Having an office environment is critical. No one's debating that. It is about the footprint. It is about the scale of that office. Would it need to be?
Right, but they're still going to grow within their office. And just as many people are talking about, in Microsoft, Google, Take-Two Interactive, that they're not going to go substantially to a work from home environment. And everybody headlines is the real estate market's going to collapse and people are going to, the cities, the big cities are going to be set back. We've had setbacks before, and we've figured out ways to repurpose ourselves and recreate ourselves. And in the article today that you guys posted related to TikTok, okay, that's a 230,000 foot lease in Times Square in the Durst building at 151 West 42nd Street. And they're right now I think they're 50, 60, 100 people in a WeWork on 49th Street.
Right, no, it's an incredible lease, and it's just indicative of you went from Condé Nast, this flagship legacy media company, to something like TikTok, which is sort of the new age company, right?
Well, but that's my point. 5 years ago, if I said to you, "Oh, TikTok's going to come to New York," people would say, "What's a TikTok?"
Well, 5 years ago, TikTok didn't even exist.
Right. Okay. So is that the clock on your, the watch on your wrist? Doesn't that tell you something? And as I've talked about before, 5 years ago was Peloton in business? Probably was just starting around there, or Etsy has been around for 10 years. IAC, Datadog, I'm not sure how long they've been around, but not less than a decade. And these companies and MongoDB,
Right.
these companies are now, on publicly traded companies worth north of $10 billion. And a lot of that market value increased over the last few months because they're providing a very, important, unique service during this difficult time. But I think that will continue. But they're based in New York. This is a part of a experiment, and some it's going to work, and sometimes it's not going to work. Remember, 20 years ago, the branches, the real estate, the banking branches, nobody was going to have banking branches.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that reversed its course, and then everybody have big branches now, and Capital One. So I think trends, have their moments of
but
going
the longer this working from home, sort of forced working from home period lasts, and it's gone on quite a bit longer than many of us expected. I don't think any landlord even thought that this is going to be a 3-month, 4-month thing initially. The longer this goes on, there's more innovation and more tools being developed to make sure that remote work isn't as crummy as it was, right?
Definitely, it would in terms of contingency planning and if there's an emergency, we now know we can work remotely, but we still don't have this interview is a lot different than if you were sitting across the room from me. Yeah. And so I think it also, I've talked to many COOs and CEOs of companies, and I think there's a shelf life in terms of people's enthusiasm for working from home. It was a great, innovative idea. You can be with your family, but talk to the young people who are sharing apartments or young people who have children and see how difficult it is to manage. All I know is we haven't heard from any of our tenants saying, "Oh my God, we're going to go and give back space." And
so in terms of space that is up for renewal, or in terms of space that is coming up shortly, do you think tenants have gained leverage where they are right now? Because I guess one of your priorities right now would be to stabilize your assets, right? Stabilize your office.
Well, first of all, we've on rent collection, we've done surprisingly well. On
as of a lot of public landlords as well. Vornado's talked about that. SL Green. When it comes to the office portion, retail is a completely different story.
We're in the mid-90s on the commercial side and the low 90s on the residential side.
So you're on the Governor's Reopening Council. You're one of the real estate advisors on that council. What sort of progress has that council made at the moment? Have you guys had several meetings? Has the governor been involved personally? What's the status of that?
We've had several formal meetings and several informal conversations with the co-chairs and other members of the task force, and discussing short-term issues related to phase 1 reopening, protocols for construction sites, protocols for opening up buildings. And which I think everybody understands the rules of engagement, that you're going to have to wear a mask. You're going to have to practice social distancing. There'll be limitations, initially in how many people are in the elevator. We're going to have to produce more fresh air in the elevators and in the space. You're going to have social distancing within your space. So those are the things that we've been working on initially. The construction protocol is the same thing. And there's been construction going on right now, the essential construction. And I think we've been working very, very closely with the construction unions. And they have they've been actively involved in these conversations.
Has everyone come to the table together? Because there's always been a little bit of sort of push and pull between
I think
construction unions.
Yes, everybody has been coming to the table. I'm also on the mayor's task force. We had a call on a subcommittee last night. The senior executive of 32BJ, Larry Elstein, was on the call, and other business leaders. This is co-chaired by Mary Ann Tai, and a whole broad group of people are on the conversation, talking about how these short-term issues, but also the medium-term issues and the longer-term issues. How do we, what have we learned in the past? And how can we apply that to now? A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. How do we stimulate the economy on a short-term, a medium-term, long-term basis? Do we talk about zoning changes related to like we did back in the 90s in Lower Manhattan, where that was, I'm not sure if you were around.
I interviewed Carl Weisbrod, so I have a good sense of
okay, well, so that was in the early 90s when we had 30 million feet of vacant space in Lower Manhattan, 30% vacancy. That was a scary, not to say, obviously, this is a very scary time, and people have lost their lives, and people have sacrificed and lost their jobs. But in terms of the real estate market, you had a 30% vacancy, and people were moving out of the city and moving into Midtown and going to New Jersey and to other parts of the country. And so what we did was we turned lemons into lemonade, right? So we sat down, Carl Weisbrod led the team. We had all the owners and the corporate leaders that are downtown, and we created a plan that provided conversion of obsolete office buildings to residential buildings, which you went from 10,000. And that's where
a lot of the financial district, a lot of the stock of the financial district came out of those initiatives, right? And now it's a pretty thriving neighborhood in New York.
It's amazing. You instead of having 10,000 people 20 plus years ago, you have over 70,000. You walk around the streets, you see kids in strollers and people walking their dogs, and there are schools. There's a school next to our building at 55 Broad Street.
You've got an interesting asset there, though, Bill. You've got 110 Wall Street downtown, and that had a component that I want to ask you about, given the time we're in, and given the sort of fear about densely packed spaces. That's we live at 110 Wall. What's the status of that initiative? People are going to be quite reluctant, at least in the short term, to kind of pack themselves in like that.
The We Live, I think, is the apartments are small, so maybe you go to only one person in the apartment or a couple living there, and I think it's still going to be a good value proposition. It's got it's got an incredible location. The ferry is right next door to it that takes you to Brooklyn and uptown.
So you think any sort of fear or hesitation on this will be short term in terms of actually?
I definitely think it's going to be short term. I was on another TV show this morning.
Yeah, you've been doing the rounds.
Right, but Ian Schrager was on, who runs all the hotels, and he was very optimistic about hotels in the future. And we're gonna hopefully see this vaccine come to market in the third and fourth quarter. But people look at these other countries. Look at Singapore and Hong Kong. They're up to 80 to some places 100% back into business.
Right, Bill, but unfortunately, we're not Singapore or Hong Kong. We don't have that unified national message, and that's part of the problem here, is that it takes us a lot longer to get things done.
Well, but I think people are the governor has been very clear about wearing your mask, okay? So I've got my mask right here. And
right, that's a cool one.
That my daughter created, that, is with the Big Apple, and it says New York Strong, and I love New York. And so we're all going to have to adapt to this reality and don't bet against New York, which is something my dad always talked about.
I am actually going to ask you about your father, Bill. Your father, Lou Rudin, was one of the champions of asking landlords to prepay their property taxes during the oil crisis, right? In New York City, when New York City
it was the fiscal crisis.
Fiscal crisis, my apologies. But he was one of the people who rounded up major landlords and said, look, our city needs us, and this is the time for us to show our stripes and step up. What's happening now is that Rebney, and you're chairman of Rebney, so in that capacity, you've asked for some relief, temporary relief in terms of property taxes. You've asked for some freezes. Can you talk a little bit about that, and whether what's the status of those discussions?
Well, I think it was different times, back then, but again, it showed the real estate industry back in the 70s, in essence, did a bridge loan for the city was running out of money. And the federal government was not stepping up. Right. So it's there's some analogies right now. We need the COVID-4 package that would provide funding for the cities and states. So the difference is it's not just about New York. Back then, it was really just about New York. Okay. So this is about your state, California, is hemorrhaging money that you're in. Ohio, and Colorado, which is a purple state. It's not a red or blue state. It's all over the country. So when you have 40 million plus unemployed, that puts a severe strain on state budgets and municipalities and city budgets. So I think it's a different dynamics that we're going through today. But we have to be creative. And I think the government, the city and state government need to, just like all of our businesses are looking at, our expenses and how we're running our business. And that's the positive side of going through this experience and using the technology and trying to become more efficient. Government needs to do the same. They have to look at their budgets. They have to look at the way they operate themselves and provide the services.
Have you been responsive to the request that REBNY has made and other groups have made about the property tax issue?
Well, I think they have the state and the city have to get through their issues related to the federal government, but we didn't ask for anything in specific. We just said be cognizant of that we cannot go forward and increase tax burdens that are already significantly higher than in other places.
I can hear the optimism throughout this interview. I've heard you several times.
It is optimism, but it's also based on, everybody likes to take a snapshot in time and the world's coming to an end. Yes, we're going through a very, very difficult time. But again and again and again, throughout history, not just about New York. I mean, there was an interesting article about in the journal the other day, and they quoted a professor who's written a book and talked about cities that have gone through severe trauma, earthquakes, bombings, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and they all come back. Look what happened in Japan with the with the earthquake, and look what happened to Berlin, and what happened to London, and we can go through history and talk about.
We're certainly one of the most resilient cities in definitely in the world. There's no question about it. But my question was, you're an optimistic person. I understand you're coming at it from decades of experience and looking at what's happened. But what would given your optimism, where are the missteps that we could make and we have to be really careful of going forward in the next 6 months, the next couple of years? Where are sort of the things that you would be most concerned that the city, the state, the government?
I think that's a good question, and I think again there's rushing back too quickly and having people get reinfected, what I think would be a very unfortunate situation. That's why the governor and the mayor talk about the masks and the social distancing. So that's one issue, and I think that we make sure that we restructure government and don't go to the knee-jerk reaction of increasing taxes and going after the middle class, the upper middle class, and the wealthy, because there's a significant amount of mobility that in our society, and that's some of what you've been talking about, that could tip us into a not a good direction.